Hello and welcome to the Story Engine podcast. My name is Kyle Gray, and today on the show we have Andreas Pettersson. We are going to be talking about the world of leadership and the high pressure role that CEOs, founders, and VPs find themselves in. We're going to discover Andreas's unique story in how he has become a great leader across many continents and many companies, and how he is helping leaders in the same position do the same. So without any further ado, let's hand it over to Andreas Pettersson.
Andreas Pettersson, welcome to the Story Engine podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Very happy to be here.
I am really excited to be here. You seem like somebody that might need to be on this show a couple of times just based on what we just discussed. But so this is going to be kind of a difficult question for someone like you to just channel this into one vein. But to start things off, I'd love to introduce you to our audience by telling us a little bit about who you are and how you're showing up in the world today.
So who I am a software engineer that turned to the dark side, aka leadership and business. Was CEO for many years for a large company, reported all the way up to Mr. Mitterrand, which is the global president of Canon, kind of like reporting to Mark Zuckerberg, I guess, here in the US. Probably the youngest CEO ever in that company. But that's a different story. Left that world, got tired of the W-2 world, and now I run a leadership advisory where I help founders, different career-focused people to get to the next level, or to founders how to level up and level out of their company.
Yeah. Well, one of the first things, and a very selfish question about me, being one of the youngest CEOs in the company, I have since a very young age, 22 or 23, not necessarily been a CEO. I can't give myself the same accolades, but we've had a similar problem and a similar experience of being a very young person and having to command respect and leadership from those who have more experience, have more age, and might look down on somebody as young as we are. And so even at the age of 36 now, I often find myself, I'm still one of the youngest people in the room. And so I've been at this for 14 years or so. And I would love for you to just speak into your own experience of commanding leadership, of commanding authority, and using your strengths and your intelligence to your advantage in environments like that.
Word curiosity comes to my mind. If no matter how old you are, if you get truly curious of the other individual, you quickly learn how to get what you're looking for and get the respect from them. Curiosity combined with abundance, combined with not sitting on high horses, tend to make people want to follow you more. I was 37 years old when I became, probably, like I said, the youngest CEO in a Canon-owned company. And even in Japanese standards as well. You can imagine, like, most CEOs become CEOs when they're late 50s, early 60s. There were so many times I went to Japan, and you bring your phone and you just have the translator running in the background. And
Absolutely.
I could hear how they were talking Japanese, or I understood how they were talking Japanese. Like, how old are you? And how can he have got this job and stuff like that right in front of me? Because I don't speak Japanese. How I also command it, I think when you are there, when everyone else wants to give up, and you lead from the front, and you are really pushing and getting the results yourself, and they see your work ethic, they see how you solve problems in a very creative way, how you are the first one you take blame, even if you have, in the end of the day, you have all the responsibility, but you take blame for something where you truly feel like, I had nothing to do with this. This was a clear fuck up, from one individual. And basically, this is clear screw up from one individual, but you still go in front of the whole company. You say, look, we can do better. It's okay. Let's celebrate this as a learning opportunity. And how do we move forward? So really culture focus, but also leading with very much about curiosity on other people. That has been the biggest thing for me. What about you? What has been the biggest thing for you?
I think it's a relationship with yourself, and it's always tested There's been many people. My first experience in this was I was working at the study abroad office at the University of Utah when I was 22 years old, so the age of a student. And then it was my responsibility to lead and instruct many different professors who were sending people to South America, Africa, and the Middle East. And I needed to achieve things and direct them and tell them what to do while looking exactly like a student. And so there were many of them that provided me the opportunity to develop a fortitude within myself of believing in myself, of believing in my authority, and commanding a self-respect, and then a respect for them as well. But I've learned, and I've heard this through many of my guests and in many different ways, many different forms of leadership, that if you cannot cultivate this respect for yourself, of authority of yourself, then you're going to subconsciously and just in your body language and movement sabotage yourself and your own imperatives. And then it will reinforce by the way that other people will see that and understand that. They will treat you in that way just by signals that you give off subconsciously.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I'm very grateful to have received that kind of training of how to hold myself, how to conduct myself. And I also appreciate you returning the questions and making this a conversation. And in the...
And I add three things. You inspired me there. So I want to say three things. One, I would never have got to where I got without mentors, coaches, friends, whatever it is. Someone in my network constantly lift me up and challenge me. The second thing is, I think when you talk about it, there are two things that people often get wrong. It's the difference between confidence and self-worth. I think deep emotional intelligence is extremely important. And sometimes people that become first-time CEOs, they don't know how to distinguish between showing up confidence and actually having the self-worth when they're showing up with confidence. And I always say self-worth for me is the foundation and confidence is the house you build on top. I see so many CEOs and so many founders that have confidence outwards, but deep down they're second guessing or they have a negative narrative in their head of how others perceive them. And they fight the self-worth for years instead of recognizing who they are today and not their inner child or who they were as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
And when you said that, it just triggered my thought process on so important with, like you said, look inwards.
Absolutely. There's some interesting symptoms of that. We're definitely going to put a pin on that and come back to that later when we're starting to craft stories. I think that's a very juicy area. Also, in the realm of curiosity, you mentioned working in Japan, needing a translator. And one of the things that I've experienced in my own life that I'm curious from your perspective is I think one of the greatest laboratories for leadership and entrepreneurship has been learning other languages and being in countries where I don't speak the language. And I spent a lot of time in South America learning both Spanish and Portuguese on the streets, sometimes as a student, sometimes as an employee, and having objectives that I needed to achieve. And it's taught me a lot about how to express myself and how to listen. And I'm curious with the diverse experiences of you that you have. I imagine you speak at least 2 or 3 languages. Tell me how your relationship with language and communication has influenced your style of leadership.
I just want to recognize your question is so important. And I meet a lot of people, especially here in the US, who don't understand the importance of sort of being a global citizen. And I wish more people could experience it.
Me too.
So obviously, English as second language. I come from Sweden. Sweden is a country where we are very, well, at least when I grew up, not anymore, we are very welcoming of other cultures, and there is less prejudice thoughts of other people. And we are taught from an early age to be culture curious, religion curious. And then if you combine that with living in Europe and then working in all these different countries, because it's so close, it's like flying to different states here in the US. You meet, and what many people don't understand is Europe is not one culture. The culture between every single country is like massively different. So growing up in that, living in Sweden, working in Denmark for many years. So I commuted every single day to Denmark. It's just 35 minutes from where I lived, but still a little bit different culture. And then after that, moving to US, becoming a US citizen while I still hold my Swedish passport, I don't feel American. I don't feel Swedish. So I usually say I'm a global citizen. That's the best way to explain it. To just tap on what you were saying one more time, if you have that upbringing, I think it also means that you're not judging as quickly. And that's how you stay curious. Many people want to judge and just categorize other people, other situations, other cultures into one bucket. And whenever my brain goes, I know where this is going, I think, what if the opposite is true? And as soon as I think that thought, what if the opposite is true? Then I slow down and really pay attention to what that person is saying. And also, when I meet someone from a different culture, I play the game of what's the one thing I can learn from this interaction that I will say afterwards, like, that really surprised me. And that way I also stay curious on culture. I don't judge based on how their rhetoric is or how they communicate. Yeah, long answer, but it's yes, I'm with you 1,000% on the importance of experiencing something else.
And the two things tie together for me in that you cannot be curious and anxious or angry or upset at the same time, in the same way that you cannot be playful and angry or anxious in a lot of ways. And there is a sign of mastery of the self, of being able to suspend judgment and have curiosity. And this is something I've seen appear many times and in many different ways. It's an interesting connection. It's the ability to have enough fortitude of self to delay a reaction and leaning into which takes a certain personal strength, and then leaning in with curiosity and opening up and looking a little bit deeper. And I so deeply agree that this is something that the world needs more of, and somehow we're losing touch with in some ways, which can segue us into the conversation about leaders really well, because I think that this is slowly starting to vanish in some ways. I think it's going to be more and more important for those that you work with or those that want to work with you to really capture.
Can I ask you a question quickly first?
Absolutely.
For me, there's a question. For me, there was a big life event where I realized how freaking blind I was to a specific situation, late 20s, where I just had a major eye-opening situation. Did you have an epiphany moment like that when you realized you got to get curious, you got to stay in the conversation, not judge all these things, or it just naturally evolved over time?
There's probably several that I could point to. And I think the process of learning a different language and embarrassing myself, was in 10,000 times by thinking I was asking somebody if I wanted to go to a restaurant and then ending up insulting their mother-in-law or something like that helps create that, and the grace that I received in that process from many people and in many different countries. And the thing that comes to mind the most when you ask this question is when I lived in Peru. I lived in Cusco and took a journey down to the Amazon jungle one day. And I was very young. I was 22 at the time and just thought I was invincible and took my life and my health for granted in many ways. I did a rope swing into an Amazonian lake filled with caiman. I was not worried about the caiman, and I didn't need to be worried about the caiman, but there was something else in that water that would end up changing the course of my life. I ended up getting something called giardia and got very, very sick in a few days after that and had to go to a clinic. And they gave me some kind of injection. I'm not sure what it was, some kind of nuclear dose of antibiotics or antiparasites. And the course of my life would change from that. I began feeling a lot more anxiety, a lot more joint pain. My jaw started to feel like it was falling off my face. And this unfolded over the course of maybe 5 or 6 years. And downstream, this would cause a lot of digestive issues and ultimately an autoimmune condition called Hashimoto's disease.
Wow.
And the moment that you're thinking of, or that I'm thinking of when you ask this question, is my very first coach asked me, "Do you think Hashimoto's could be your superpower?" And I laughed at him. It was the stupidest thing I had ever heard. I was outraged, ready to fire him on the spot, hang up the call. No, get this guy out of here. And I continue to reflect on that moment and how right he was. So this is a course of a decade of unfolding, and that moment and that point and the lessons that I've learned from losing grasp of my health and still being in the process of regaining it and recultivating it and truly appreciating it for what it is, has taught me that humility and that curiosity and that openness. And it's become one of my greatest teachers. And in fact, I work with many different experts in the health and wellness field. And I'm very proud of the work that I do, particularly with those clients, for the impact that they can make. And because of the pain that I went through in my case, I understand the experience of their clients and their people in a way that is very difficult to grasp for a health professional or translate into powerful stories and teachings. And so what was once the greatest curse in my life has become a strength and an advantage and something that I am grateful for, even though I'm not fully out of the jungle yet in some ways in learning from and recovering and developing my health.
That's a really good story.
Oh, thank you.
That I don't want to, let's just say I share something similar with you, which for me it's AFib and the heart issue and thinking I was going to pass away. And that is my superpower. It's how I live life in a happy, fulfilled way. And I think I talked to a leadership psychologist and he said the happiest people are people who truly can embrace the biggest negatives in lives and turn them into something positive. Because if you can do it at that scale, you can do it with any situation you stumble upon any day of your life, and everything else is just okay. It doesn't matter in the bigger scheme of things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's amazing, Kyle. That's super cool. And it is your superpower, probably.
Likewise. One of many. One of many for both of us, I have no doubt.
Yeah. That's the whole TV thing that you only have one superpower. No. A good leader has many superpowers.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, this is something hard won for both of us. And I would love to discuss symptoms and not health symptoms, but symptoms of the leaders that you work with that cannot embrace the negatives in their life. What would this look like in the life of a founder, in the life of a vice president, in the life of somebody who knows achieved a certain level of success and externally it appears like everything's firing on all cylinders, but there's still something that's holding them back?
People tend to mix emotions with logical reasoning, and how it often comes about is the word fear comes up. They don't know how to recategorize it as unfamiliar. There are often relationships with early employees that have leadership positions in the company. They have become personal friends. They might do activities with the kids together. And when I start working with them, everyone comes to me and they're like, oh, I have this problem. Can you help me fix it? It's never the problem. Okay, 1 in 10 is the actual problem. But 9 out of 10 times, it's often they don't have, they're too reactive, they're too emotional, or they're not taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture. In the end of the day, it's usually someone have to be fired, someone have to be hired, a product have to be changed, or the messaging for the product have to be changed. Or in many cases, I meet founders that are very ADHD, and as soon as they start getting control of their company, what ends up happening is they're almost self-sabotaging, or they are being stupid cheap, hiring people that are subpar, people that they needed 5 years ago and not people they need for the next 5 years. But it's usually, I help people get out of them being the chief problem solver. I help them getting out of the mindset that they cannot make changes on the C level or on the founder level. And almost every single time it starts with a 2 to 6 weeks discovery of who they are today. Many founders and executives, if we want to talk symptoms, they look at themselves in the mirror of who they were 5 years ago. They don't look at themselves and they haven't recognized all the things they've accomplished up to this point. So often it's like me holding up a mirror for them for the first 2 to 6 weeks, making them understand who they are today and then we can make the changes required. Most times, like I said, they cannot articulate this. I often have to dig in and understand what really pushes their buttons. When are they showing up at their best? When are they at the worst? And yeah, in most situations, it's the hire and fire that needs to be done. It's often, the classical get it, want it capacity to do it. And that might have been true a few years ago, but not today. Or it's a person that isn't a culture fit anymore. The person you need to get to the first 3 million in revenue is not the person you need to get to 3 to 10 to 15 million. But they have been there so long. They were loyal with me. Yeah, okay, great. You're running a charity company. Do you want to keep doing that, or you want to run a for-profit company? Let's get rid of the people that are holding you back. No offense, great, they're on the journey. Send them off with a good check. I'm fine with that. But in the end of the day, it's not the people you need to get to the next level. And then often, you've seen these spans. Sorry, long answer, but I just got to say the last thing I see is the grind up to a few million in revenue, and then they often need process and procedures to get to the around 10, 8-figure number. And then beyond that, it's leadership. They got to grow the next level of leadership to not be switching the leadership, but just keep growing them.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I appreciate and just want to acknowledge, even through the short conversation that we've had so far. Your curiosity and being up to hold the mirror into somebody's talents and powers is very evident already. And I think one of the interesting things, is being able, these people need to be able to identify who they need to hire and who they need to fire and what leadership is. And I think one of the symptoms or self-talks or things, if somebody's in who they were 5 years ago, and I can certainly identify with this, and I've heard hundreds of stories of all kinds of people in the same way, it's a belief that if I don't do everything, if I can't fix everything, then it's all going to fall apart. It's all falling on me. And this leaves them in a state of doing what they're great at and a lot of doing executing, which often means they're stepping on their teammates' toes. So they wouldn't even notice who's performing well or who's not, because they're not just doing their job. And in fact, they're not doing their job. They're doing their whole team's jobs. And then this creates team members that don't feel like they're empowered or inspired to present any ideas, to have any opinions, because they just get their toes stepped on and the leader is going to take care of everything. They're always asking them questions and the leader needs to put out every fire themselves, because if they don't, they're afraid that it's all going to fall apart. And so they're in this panic mode. Again, the opposite, the lacking of curiosity to be encompassed in this.
I think you nailed it, actually, the way you described it there. And that is what I refer to as a chief problem solver. And they're so afraid that when they give that up to someone else, that they don't feel worthy anymore. But a proper leader at the top that needs to level up in the organization and then level out, put other people in place instead, they have to recognize that they have to redo their culture and they have to trust but verify with their employees. I'm okay with that they're verifying, but they have to trust first. And they got to recalibrate the word failure. So many founders I work with, they're so afraid of failures that they become stagnant and don't take risks anymore. And they took risks early on, or when they were in crisis, they took a bunch of risks. But over time, they stopped taking risks because now they're destroying something and they're dependent on other people's families are dependent on their business and all of that. But as a result, they've been growing and now they're plateauing. And I think a company is either going up or it's going down. The plateau is just a temporary state before it goes down. And I've seen it over and over again. And that's why raw awareness of who they are and who they need to become, and then changing fear to unfamiliar, usually gets people going again. And many of the clients I worked with, I only work with people for 4 to 6 months. They shouldn't need me after that. I don't want to latch on. But I dislike advisors, coaches that just leech their clients for years. I believe you can go in and solve a problem and then you need to get out. And sure, you can re-engage with the client years later, but the leader got to step up and run with it themselves for a while first. Otherwise, I'm just a crutch for them that they're always going to need. And that's where a lot of coaches fail. But where I was going with this is, in the end of the day, get out of their own way.
I love this. And this actually segues into what I've got next. what makes your process unique and better? And the first one of the three that we'll explore is that this should only be 4 to 6 months. This is a problem that I should know is solved so I can move on with and do the rest of my life. So I think that's one. What else? I think that the curiosity and holding up a mirror to value is one.
I sometimes get into trouble for this, and I command people to take action when they work with me. But in the end of the day, I'm a firm believer of radical candor and resilience. And if I work with you, I am going to say what I think. Now, my opinion is just an opinion. In the end of the day, I don't run the company for someone. They do. It's their decisions. And yeah, I don't have a scoreboard that is 100 out of 100. But in the end of the day, you have no clue how many times I start working with someone and I tell them something and their first reaction is like, that's rude. Like, how can you tell me this? Like, they almost get defensive. And then 10 minutes later, they're like, why have no one told me this? Like, if it's so clear for you after just a few sessions, why have no one told me? And then I have to give them the speech of, because you don't let them. And it's because you are not, so it dovetails into curiosity, but the radical candor of being direct, but not emotionally expressive. I'm tired of, like, I had so many coaches and mentors and advisors when I was a CEO and executive for a decade. And I have to say that in the end of the day, many of them protected their wallets. And here's the key lesson. The ones who didn't protect their wallet and they were willing to piss me off, like the guy who told you this is probably your superpower. I forgot the name of the disease. Those stuck around. Like, I kept them around for a long time. So what I'm trying to say is most advisors, coaches, mentors out there, they do the wrong thing. They're instilling fear if they're not willing to piss off their clients. And they're not getting results. Like, and I refuse to be such a person. I rather have a bunch of angry customers, but they at least are getting the results and they're getting a transformational change. They might not love me. I'm okay with that as long as they get what they're looking for and what they hired me for.
Absolutely. And this is the environment that these leaders have created with their teams for reasons that we've all expressed before. Nobody feels empowered to challenge them in this way because they are in this anxious state and always solving problems. That nobody has permission to give it to them direct. And that is what they want. And it's one of the things that I do and like people value in me is I challenge them on their thoughts and their stories and their ideas. And it allows for better stories and better conversations to happen. But if we can't have that friction, then nothing comes. So that's an excellent third point.
And I would say also, this is a cultural thing. I'm taking my Scandinavian direct, no emotions approach to leadership. And I've done that since I got here. You at least know where you have me. Then if you don't like my position, that's okay. But in Europe, and I think it's also the society here in US, especially on the West Coast, people are very afraid of conflict. And they refer to everything as conflict. I'm not saying everyone, but a lot of people, there are two modalities. You can't have like a heated debate and actually learn from one another. I think conflict is a positive word because you go away smarter and knowledgeable and understand the other person's opinion. Now, the trick is to not escalate the emotional expressiveness because then the conversation tends to be shorter. In Europe, we talk about politics all the time. We talk about openly about mindset, religion, all these other things, not in a negative light, not in conflict, but we talk about it. Here, people don't. And then you go into a work situation, and obviously that is your core DNA and who you are. And I'll just add one more thing, Kyle, and this is something I literally in the last few days wrote a blog post about this because I lost a friend of mine. There is like this whole pandemic here in US, especially for men leaders who refuse to speak up about how they truly feel. And I think part of that is when they were a child, they were told, stop crying. And like, don't show your emotion, don't feel. That was kind of what their parents were telling them. A lot of the leaders I work with, when I start working with them, I'm like, how do you feel? And they give this, I'm great. How are you? No. I asked you, like, how do you really feel? Like, tell me, walk me through your day. Walk me through how you feel. Walk me through, like, what is keeping you up on a Friday night? How is your relationship at home? How is your work-life harmony? Like, we have to talk about these things. And some of the people I work with, they really don't want to have that conversation, not part of the culture. When I teach them to have the conversation of what I call openness and vulnerability, which this is like a subleg of radical candor discussion, but that's when I start seeing change, especially in men who admits, like, I feel like shit, or I feel like I have all the pressure on in the world on my shoulders. I don't know who to turn to. I feel hopeless. Like, okay, we can work with that. Like, let's talk about that. But until I get to that stage, it's really, really hard to get, especially men, to move. Women tend to be a little bit more vulnerable and open about it, but the society. But again, I think it's back to society and not discussing these things. And it's not okay to have healthy conflict.
Yeah, I see roots in this in health as well. I think this is a very strong observation. And kind of going back to my own experiences, there have been very few times where when I experience like digestive problems, I experience anxiety. Mm-hmm. And I'm very rarely able to properly attribute that anxiety to my gut health is like this. And so it's obviously, especially here in the United States, where we only have emotions in our political discussions, the other political parties doing this to me, they're ruining it, and or my business is falling apart. And actually being able to be honest is very important and very powerful. And if you can't do it as a leader, then you can't expect it from your team or anyone else around you. And how can you, if you can't lead in that way, how can you actually get any data, any kind of information in what's actually happening in your business with your team, what the real problems are occurring right now, because everybody is just pretending that everything's fine so we can get on with the conversation, but that we've missed the whole conversation.
Boom, you nailed it again. Yes.
Thank you. Well, let's transition. I want to hear a story from you, or at least an element of a story. And I want to read back some of these problem statements that we've been talking about over time. And your first role in this game is going to be feeling in your body where these words affect you. Mm-hmm. So this is you're always second guessing. You have a negative narrative. Everybody seems to be looking down on you, judging you. And any of the negatives in life are reactions, they're problems. Emotions are getting in the way, and it's impossible to take a step back. You're just constantly in this chaos of things happening, of information, and you're never quite sure what needs to happen, but it also feels so urgent that something needs to happen around you. But it's hard to make any changes. And again, it's all falling on you. The world is on your shoulders. And of course, you're afraid that if you make the wrong choice or make a mistake, it's all going to fall apart.
So what I react to and what I hear or the feeling that I get myself, if I put myself in the role of the CEO, is the feeling of trying to take control over chaos, constant firefighting, and then feeling that every time I had a plan every single day and I was going to do something strategic, I just get sucked into the tactics because someone is knocking on the door all the time asking me to solve the problem. And then I feel stress. The feeling that you also evoked there was when that happens, I can give you the answer, and I will give you the answer if I am in this modality, because I feel like the company cannot afford to teach you how to properly solve the problem yourself. And that's the emotion, that frustration of being stuck in that loop of knowing, when do I pull the brake and just go, you know what? I will not solve your problems anymore. You need to learn to solve them. I can help you solve them. Don't come to me. It's the classical. Don't come to me for the solution. Come to me to explain how you're going to solve the problem.
Amazing. Can you tell me a specific time, a specific Tuesday afternoon where you were feeling this feeling and you were having this experience?
Many Tuesday afternoons in the first 2 to 3 years as being a CEO. I think after that, I'm going to try not to swear now. There were a few life events that happened to me that there's a great, interesting book. Let's call it interesting so I don't... The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F.
Oh yeah, one of my favorite authors and somebody I've actually met before.
Yeah, very interesting. But there's something to that on every level of life and even within leadership.
So for the sake, because you're going to teach us something, and that's not what I want to hear anymore. I want to hear about one of these days. I want to know the office that you were sitting in and somebody was knocking on the door looking for problems solved. And I wanted to know what's on the walls of your office. What does the room look like? What's desk are you sitting at? What time of day is it?
Should I take myself or one of my clients?
You.
Okay, so for me, when I was a CEO, my room was filled with whiteboards because I'm a very creative person and I'm a visual as well. I need to draw it up. I need a process. I need a flow. I need something. I need my little stick figures on there. Also in that office is very few things because I am a firm believer that the more things you clutter your office with, the more cluttered your brain is, and the more creative space you have, the better it is. With that said, obviously there are a few plants. The shades are always up on the window so I can look outside. In between meetings, I often sit and take 2 minutes and just stare out. Maybe I close the door, listen to my favorite song, just to recalibrate and reset my mood into the right level before the next meeting. If you want to talk about a specific situation, it's very dependent for every leader. For me, it was customers who had a bad experience. Number 2 would be that causes this frustration of I need to work on something else. So the dilemma for me was always customers had a bad experience, or on the flip side, a board member asking for a specific result. And I know I will have to, my brain almost always prioritize the customer when I know many times I could have delegated these first few years, I could have delegated that to someone else. So I didn't sit in the evening and half the night to create a board presentation or a board report explaining our results.
Tell me about staring out the window. What did it look like outside the window?
So where I used to work, I had the corner office, full glass, so everyone could see into my room all the time. Like door almost always open, and were a few people there. Outside, we had a very nice backyard campus area, grass, sitting places, coffee places, a little garden. And then in the background, I can see all the airplanes landing on John Wayne Airport.
Perfect. Okay. Let's see. And now tell me about a time, the opposite frequency of a time where you were in your lane as a leader and you could speak directly to the people that you can trust. You were aligned and in like the flow of leadership.
The flow of leadership, and what I learned after the 3 years is growing leaders tend to create growing organizations, and the opposite is also true. So when I finally learned to trust, verify, and learn to appreciate the silence when people were not coming to me with problems anymore, and I kept hearing from customers that were happy. I kept hearing from employees who felt like we had an amazing culture, or leaders that went, FYI, we had code red, customers super happy, we fixed it. Like when I got to that stage and I could actually do my fiduciary responsibilities as a CEO during work hours and not weekends and evenings, I love my work. I love my work when I could find time to coach and mentor up and coming leaders in the bottom of the organization or entry level of the organization. I loved when I could go to customers and hear how our service or product changed their lives and how they just love it. Like CX in general, customer experience. Like those were days where, now, are there problems? Of course there are problems. Of course people took care of it. But for me, it was when I put the right leaders in the right seats with the right level of responsibility and authority. After that, being a CEO is the best freaking job in the world.
Perfect. Are you ready to hear your story?
Tell me my story, Kyle.
I can remember being in an office filled with whiteboards, scribbled out with plans and goals and intentions, and just hearing the noise of everyone around me, of the demands of all of my people, bearing down on me like the weight of the whole world is on me. So many problems that I need to solve are written out on the walls, are written here and there. And any moment of silence that I seem to have is immediately interrupted by somebody knocking on my door with a new fire to put out and asking me how to figure it out. There is so much pressure on me at every moment. And if I can't figure this all out, I feel like it's all going to fall apart. In between these moments, when I catch a single breath for me, I stare out my window, looking into the nice patio backyard, some of my employees having coffee together. I'm a little bit envious of them actually being able to relax, actually being able to turn off, actually being able to live a life outside of this container that I've created for myself. And it was on that day, after one too many knocks on the door, that I knew that something needed to change, that I needed to discover a process to do this better, to get in touch with the truth, to be able to express myself and allow those around me to be able to speak their own truths. I wanted something that would have lasting results. I wanted a problem that I knew was solved, and I wouldn't have to keep going back to it and solving it over and over again. I wanted a way to hold up the mirror to my true value and understand where I was and who I was right now, instead of operating the same way that I thought and was a few years ago. And I needed a way to be able to tell the truth and hear the truth in a way that was clear, in a way that was powerful, and navigate conflict without emotion, but with directness and respect. And over the course of many years and a lot of costly and painful mistakes, I began to solve this problem. And I can remember one day when I really realized that being a CEO was the best job. It wasn't receiving accolades necessarily or achieving a lot of things. It was a moment of silence, knowing that customers were happy, knowing that my team members and employees were happy and operating in their lanes, seeing emails and messages saying, FYI, we had a code red earlier, but don't worry, we fixed it. I found myself having more time, not just to put out fires and solve problems and answer questions, but actually coach the upcoming leaders and understand my team and be curious for them and cultivate them, doing my best work instead of just being responsive all of the time. And it was only then, when I had the right leaders in the right seats and everybody doing what they loved, I knew that being a CEO was the best job out there. And that's what I'm going to teach you to do and to be today.
Boom. That was really good.
Thank you.
That was really, really, really good. And you're right. I was looking out that window many times thinking, how the hell do they have time for a break right now? Like we're in the middle of this shitstorm, and you should pick up the phone and not sit for lunch outside for half an hour to an hour. Like, you take 5 minutes and let's go. And I think that's the responsibility piece that you carry a lot of weights on your shoulders as a CEO. And because in the end of the day, you feel responsible, but everyone don't feel as responsible as you do. Really good story.
Well, thank
Good
you.
way of synthesizing a conversation into something in a short amount of time.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate that deeply. And I also want to respect your time. I know we're getting to the close of our hour. And so where can we go to learn more about you and connect with you? And do you have any closing thoughts to wrap up our interview today?
A mini promotion here. I figured it out. I figured out how to get out of that grind and actually run a proper marathon instead of sprints every single day. So many people haven't figured it out. I want to help others figure it out. The best way to reach out to me is go to my Instagram. I answer all my messages there. I DM. It's Andreas, the CEO, is my tag. Plus, I put out a ton of free material to help others overcome all the challenges I overcame. Every time I help a client with a problem, it usually turns into a blog post. You can find that on leadersadapt.com. In the end of the day, my mission is to help 10,000 entrepreneurs and make a big difference in their lives. So they're not the ones sitting and staring out the window and hoping they could have a coffee in the backyard. So if anyone ever listened to this and they feel like my story resonated, I got the recipe to get out of that situation.
Amazing. Andreas Pettersson, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your talents with us today on the Story Engine podcast.
Thank you.